You're going to lose focus if you go to a different country. It's different regulations. It's not like a plug and play model that you can, our concepts are similar, the culture is similar, the language is the same, but it's not exactly the same. So you need to adapt.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Frontera, a podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic startup and venture capital ecosystem in Latin America and the innovators behind it all. We're your hosts, Cyrus and Tom. If you enjoy this conversation, we invite you to subscribe to our newsletter where we announce new episodes and share additional insights and resources for founders and investors alike. We'd also like to invite you to share this podcast with your friends and to leave a review on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube to help more people discover the show. We love hearing from our audience. You can connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter by searching for La Frontera Podcast. In this episode of La Frontera, we sit down with Alejandro Troll, GP at BVC, to unpack the differences between venture ecosystems in Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, and why those nuances matter for startups and investors. We explore how BVC builds trusted deal flow in markets like Peru and Colombia, sources high potential startups before they hit major accelerators, and works to educate Japanese LPs on the opportunity in LatAm. We also settle a critical debate. Does Peru really have the best sushi in the world? Hey folks, welcome to another episode of La Frontera Podcast. We're here with Alejandro Troll. He's a general partner at BVC. BVC first began operations in 2016 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then expanded to Colombia and Peru in 2021, where they now have a local investment team. Alejandro and I first met at an event during Colombia Tech Week in Bogota, where we had a great conversation around his thoughts on investing and how to support overlooked founders. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. Thank you for joining us, Alejandro.
Hello, Cyrus and Thomas. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. So I think to start, what I'd love to do is give our listeners a brief overview of your background and what led you to join BVC. So if you could talk about the company you co-founded and your experience in starting with BVC in Brazil, that'd be fantastic.
All right. Well, actually, the way I started in VC, it was maybe a little bit casual. So I used to work for a corporation, like a big corporation, a telecom corporation, actually, in LatAm. And I was looking after digital transformation projects for the whole region. So I used to live in Sao Paulo. I'm from Peru originally, but I used to live in Sao Paulo for a few years. And I was just traveling around the region, talking to the local operation people, and then understanding what are the issues that they had. So we, as a corporate area, could bring some solutions through digital transformation. So I started working with an acceleration program from the corporation, like a CVC. They had offices in Peru, in Sao Paulo, in Bogota as well. And so I started to work with some startups that will bring some digital solutions for the corporation. So that was the first time that I started to talk with entrepreneurs to find this alignment between the strategy of the company and the project that they were bringing to the acceleration program. So some of these companies will be hired by the company, by the corporation. Some of them will be used as a solution for our own clients. So I started learning a lot about the ecosystem, about what was going in Brazil mainly. And at the same time, a friend of mine, Mitsuru, who is the founder of the fund of BVC, he's a friend of mine from the MBA. We studied together in Madrid in 2011. We did an MBA. And then he was also living in Sao Paulo. After the MBA, he moved to work in Bain & Company in Sao Paulo. So we were friends. We saw each other, every once in a while. And then I knew he was working on VC. And then he found out I was working with startups. And so we started working something together. I was just bringing some deal flow for his fund. And then after some time, we started talking about me, being a partner, maybe investing in the fund. But, a lot of things changed at the moment and I left the company. So I decided to work with Mitsuru, to bring the fund to open operations in other countries because we were focused on Brazil at the beginning, as you said. And then we started looking for a local team or local opportunities in Peru and Colombia. Also, it was 2019, then the pandemic started. So everything changed and I moved back to Lima. And well, it was mainly for personal reasons, but also, it made sense for the fund. So we started investing in Peru and Colombia mainly. You asked about the company that I co-founded. Well, it wasn't really a startup company. It was a media company, like content. At that time, we didn't have AI, so we were actually doing our own content. We had copywriters and stuff. And we were working with little companies, like small and medium businesses in Brazil. So we were creating that digital strategy for them. And I mean, it was all a mix up. One of my co-founders, he also was a co-founder in a real startup, that were using like some technology and he wanted to be funded by BVC at some time. So it was, everything at the same time was happening. Mitsuru at that point didn't invest in his company, but it was part of our learning process actually.
So when you finally joined BVC, what was that process like? How early on was that? This was back in 2019, I believe, right?
Yeah, correct.
So how was that like joining BVC back in 2019, especially with like an early stage VC, given that they started, back in 2016, so they're about 3 years old at that point. Was that at the end? Was that towards the end of Fund 1 when you joined, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So BVC started in 2016. Yeah, that was the first fund. It was a small fund actually. It was Mitsuru and some friends that created the fund. They invested in 12 companies, all of them in Brazil. So when I joined, we started looking for opportunities outside Brazil. The idea of like expanding the operations to other countries was like Brazil, the ecosystem of Brazil started growing in maybe 2014, 2015, it started to accelerate. But then the other countries in the region, like Peru and Colombia, they were, really just starting, like really emerging or nascent ecosystems. So the idea was to learn from the mature ecosystem like Brazil's, and then to bring this knowledge, this experience, maybe to understand what are the business models that worked in Brazil and that may work also in Colombia and Peru. Also, because these other two ecosystems were smaller, of course, and as a small fund, we had the opportunity to be a relevant player. For example, in Brazil, there are like maybe 40, 50, or 60 VCs, investing in early stage or maybe Series A type of companies like us. Whether in Peru, there are like maybe 4 or 5 VC funds, also in Colombia, like local funds. Of course, there are some international funds investing in these countries, but local funds are really few. So it gave us the opportunity to really access all the really good deals, to really know the ecosystem, understand who are the best entrepreneurs, and be a relevant player actually in these two ecosystems.
Yeah. It's interesting that you guys, started in Brazil and are sort of expanded to Spanish speaking LatAm. Like from my understanding, except for the biggest, VC funds, for the most part, like Casec, Monarchies, most people most funds kind of stick with one or the other, Brazil or Spanish speaking LatAm. I think Brazil is known to be very different, obviously different language, total different ecosystem. As you mentioned, they were kind of ahead of the game. I've heard like some people say like, maybe they're 7 to 8 years ahead of like the rest of Spanish speaking LatAm.
Yep.
My understanding is, aside from just the size of its economy, like I think the government has been very supportive for a long time of the VC ecosystem, especially in fintech. That's why they have like a flourishing fintech ecosystem. What is it like? What are kind of the factors that you would attribute to Brazil, I guess, getting off to a quicker start, a more mature ecosystem versus countries like Colombia, Peru, other than, I guess, like the size?
Yeah, I would say that it's because of the maturity of the investors. There's a lot of type of investors. So there are private equity funds, bigger funds like secondary funds, and they started like way back. And this also filtered through the family offices and then angel investors that started to invest in these companies. And that's something really different from what I see in Brazil and Spanish-speaking LatAm. Maybe Mexico, it's in the middle. But the other countries, few family offices and there are few angel investors. So one of our main targets or maybe main challenges in Peru and Colombia is to educate investors or individual people that they can invest in companies, how to do it. Even if they do it through a venture fund like ours, they can do it also directly. But there's a need for education for this type of investor because VC is risky. And what we saw happening maybe in 2018 in Colombia, Peru, is that some of these investors started to invest in startups because it was a hype. Some of the new unicorns were born in Colombia and Mexico, like Rappi. So this trend was starting to grow. But what happened is that they didn't know how to invest, some of these angel investors. So they invested, they lost their money, and now they don't want to know anything about venture capital. So it's our job right now to re-educate, to make it safer, have better regulation or better contract with the companies to be protected. but it's a big challenge. So in Brazil, since they were more exposed to these unicorns or companies, tech companies that even they made some IPOs in Brazil. So people are really aware of what's going on in the ecosystem or the tech startup. But Brazil, Colombia and Peru, it started later. But, Colombia, it's growing faster. Like, I mean, I don't know, Cyrus, when you were there, you had the feeling of like, there were a lot of new entrepreneurs, talent, and especially the effect of these like mafias from the unicorns, like the Papi Mafia or the Javi or other companies that grew. And Mercado Libre, even, ex-founders that had an exit or, they can invest as angels or they're creating their own VC funds. So that's, accelerating the process in these other ecosystems, other countries.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that during the Colombia Tech Week. It seemed like a very vibrant community. And I think Mexico and Colombia definitely have some of the most vibrant startup communities. I think the VC ecosystem still has to catch up in Colombia. It seems like a lot of the VCs are still based out of Mexico or Brazil. It seems like there's only like a few based out of Colombia themselves. On the majority of the startups I've talked to coming out of Colombia, I've gotten funding from outside of Colombia. So that's, I think, the one thing that we've noticed. But yeah, so many incredible founders coming out of there. I've actually talked to a couple recently.
That's great. Maybe going back, Thomas, to your question of why we would go from Brazil to other countries where maybe Brazil, you can invest in Brazil, only in Brazil, and then you have enough opportunities to invest, companies, maybe IPOs or M&As and stuff. So like for our fund, our strategy is to invest maybe half of the fund, 50%, in Brazilian startups, and then the other 50% will be focused on Spanish-speaking LatAm. So that's going to give us like this balance of maybe a more liquid, more agile market as Brazil. And then we can access better deals, like I mentioned before, in Colombia and Peru mainly. But we can also invest in other countries of the region. But then this vision of broader vision of the ecosystem, of the LatAm ecosystem, I think it gives us this, it's an edge for us.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think having that flexibility is definitely huge. And I guess differences, that you already kind of spoke to, investing in Brazil and Spanish-speaking LatAm. I think Brazil maybe doesn't need quite as much support in funding, right? You already said their like fundraising ecosystem is I wouldn't say quite. It's a little bit different than the US, but it has all the pieces are kind of there, right? And it's been like that for a while. Versus in Colombia and Peru, I'm guessing there's probably a little bit less competition in going for deals, and also there's a lot of founders that are maybe a little bit overlooked, right? Because they don't have as many local sources of funding. So if you have access to that deal flow, that's a great way to kind of lay a foundation there.
Yeah. And actually on that note, so talking about Peru, right? So when you joined and you wanted to expand into Colombia and Peru, I'm assuming you relied on, networks that you've already had within Peru or Colombia, but can you talk a little bit more about what that looked like expanding into Colombia and Peru, and how you built out those networks there and founders aware of BVC, especially since finding good early stage founders is tough without the right networks?
Sure. Well, at the beginning, I had been living in Sao Paulo for 8 years. Yeah. So my network, and before that I used to live, I was studying in Spain. So like maybe my network on the ecosystem was super small, so I had to like build it up from zero actually. But I had a really good friend from MBA and from college in Peru, that he founded that startup. At that moment, he was founding a startup. So he was my key connector at the beginning. So he introduced me to some acceleration program, acceleration managers, a couple of other VC funds that they were operating in Peru. And also, there's something specific about Peru. The government, it's mandatory for every university to have an innovation program. And this can be focused on innovation, focused on incubation or acceleration. So the college, the university that I went to, they already had this program in place. So I contacted them. I said, I'm back in Lima. I want to know more about the ecosystem. What can we do together? So that was the start of my networking in Lima. So I was able to meet entrepreneurs going through these acceleration programs, incubation programs, and to really understand where are the opportunities, or maybe who are the key players that I should be, close to.
Yeah.
So Telefónica, I didn't mention that before, but I was working in Telefónica in Sao Paulo. So that's the big corporation that I was talking about. And they have their own acceleration program called WIDA. And they also had a WIDA program in Peru. So I went there, I went to the office, I presented, our investment philosophy. BC Mitsuru traveled with me a couple of times to Lima. so we could understand the ecosystem. And after that, it was kind of easy because I kind of knew at the beginning the key players. And then we started doing some, open call, for startups. We started doing some events, some webinars. So like bringing this like knowledge online or in-person events that will, make us better known or well known in the ecosystem. Also, a lot of working together with these acceleration programs that already had some presence in Lima mainly.
Yeah. So one thing you brought up, you mentioned that the universities in Peru have to have an innovation head or innovation lead. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Like, what does that typically look like?
Yeah. So this law, I'm not sure when it started, but all of the universities need to have a program for innovation. But then it depends on each university to decide if they want to do some, for example, innovation, like more basic or like just like a course or maybe entrepreneurship program. Or some of them are creating incubation programs. And some, just a few, maybe a couple, I would say, they have a real acceleration program. So that's more complex, more advanced. So the thing is that the universities don't have the knowledge to have a incubation program. So they need to learn themselves first. The teachers, the mentors that are working in these programs, they need to go to other programs, maybe in other countries or like to study to really be able to help the entrepreneurs that are going through their own programs. So it started. Every year I hear more incubation programs being founded. And also we are working with these universities to like as mentors for the entrepreneurs and mentors for the mentors that are working in the universities to show them, to maybe not to show them, but to let them know what is the vision of a VC fund, what are we looking for in entrepreneurs, so they can really help these entrepreneurs in that way. These last 2 years, I think the Peruvian government, they have a budget, so they're financing these programs. So they are able to attend other, courses, to learn, to also hire, VC managers, we could be teachers at their own programs. So I think the government is also like trying to be more active, more hands-on on the ecosystem and trying to boost all these really early stage entrepreneurs through the incubation programs.
That's incredible. That's really good to see. I think that's something that we've seen like in Mexico, for example, with fintech. I think the government has made it where it's easy to start a fintech company in Mexico, and that's why you've seen like a flourishing environment of fintechs. So that's really good to see. Good on Peru.
Yeah. Of course, there's so many other challenges like regulation, like you mentioned, for example, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, they have a fintech regulation. Colombia, I think it's about to finish or to approve it, but it's going to be there. However, Peru, it's really slow on making changes in this regulation. So I don't think something new is going to happen in Peru for the next few years anyway, in those terms. So like probably some fintech, new type of fintech, I don't think it's going to be happening. At least like the way it's going on in Brazil, that is super fast, and they use the structure that is being put into place by the government itself.
Yeah. And then I think maybe like some challenges might arise just from the general kind of market size, right, of a Peru, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think like founders have to consider, if they're creating a tech startup that they expect to scale, right? Like they probably have to pitch to you guys, here's our expansion plan, right? Because you can cover the whole market and kind of like grow, develop, find product market fit in a market like Peru, but you might have to then expand to Mexico. Different from Brazil, where the pitch is a little bit easier, right? It's like you create a product and you have an economy that's, I don't know, like a third the size of the US or something like that. And you only have to focus on that country. But how does that conversation, I guess, like go with founders? Do you look for an expansion plan, or like what is the typical kind of like process for a company that started in Peru or Colombia?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of different ideas or different approaches. Actually, for us, it is important to have maybe a long-term vision that a company can be international, that they can grow from Peru to Colombia and Mexico mainly because of the market size. However, we also believe that companies that they need to be really efficient and they need to be profitable in their own market at the beginning. So when I talk to an entrepreneur and they say like, okay, we want to raise this pre-seed round and our first milestone is going to be to expand to Mexico. I feel like, no, that doesn't work. I mean, you need to be, you need to have a product market fit in Peru. That's a market that you know already. You need to adapt to, you're going to lose focus if you go to a different country, it's different regulations. It doesn't It's not like a plug and play model that you can, our concepts are similar, the culture is similar, the language is the same, but it's not exactly the same. So you need to adapt. And of course, there are other competitors, the landscape is different. So I always tell the entrepreneurs that they want to, scale internationally since the beginning, that doesn't work. However, there are some VCs that are expecting that, because the vision of a lot of the VCs, well, maybe it's changing now, but it was to, okay, let's create a unicorn. And the only way to create a unicorn from Peru, it's mainly scaling in different countries because of the market size, of course. This view is changed. And now we're looking for more profitable companies that can make an exit through an M&A locally. Corporations are starting to look at startups as a solution, a way to be more digital. So they understand that they don't need to, build solutions within their own companies, but they can just, acquire a startup. But that's part of the maturity of the ecosystem. So I think it's changing. The view of the VCs is also changing, but there's still a lot of this view of, okay, we need to scale to Mexico. Yeah. Maybe for some, this is not an absolute answer, of course, maybe for some business model that is necessary, but not for all. And there's always a good timing to do this. Not at the beginning, of course.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I want to touch on one thing you mentioned, which is trying to position a company for M&A. So a two-part question. One, what have you typically seen in terms of like valuations in Peru? Because we've had a conversation and Rene had he gave us some pretty good ranges in terms of like the valuation gap within companies in LatAm, which is like after, I'm going to butcher this probably. I have to look at my notes, but I think it's like below 300 million. And then like there's 1 billion and above, but between 300 million and 1 billion, it's like, it's tough to be acquired in LatAm in that valuation range. Yeah. But also you can't list publicly on the stock market in the United States. So startups struggle with like exiting in that valuation range. But also I've talked to like other VCs where they've started to help. They've brought in folks that have connections with corporate partners so that as they talk to startups, they can start talking to the founders about, hey, this is how you can position yourself for a good exit. And these are the types of corporations that could buy you. Maybe these are the conversations you can start having with these corporations. Anyways, going back to the question. So number one, like what kind of valuation ranges have you seen in Peru of like startups as they, when they're first launching, and like what have you guys been investing in? But then from there, how are you helping founders think about the types of companies they should be reaching out to as they start to think about like potential like exits, potential M&A?
So our investment strategy is focused on the pre-seed or maybe the early seed rounds, like when a companies are starting to have attraction, they're starting to have sales. And there's like a momentum of growth. That's maybe it's for a lot of the VCs, that's the ideal moment to invest. So what we're looking at in Peru, it's maybe similar to what we see in Colombia. We're investing in our pre-seed rounds between $1 and $5 million valuation. That's maybe our sweet spot. Of course, there's some companies that are like 6 or 7 million, depending on the size of the market. But that's our sweet spot because mainly of what you said at the beginning, like we're thinking about what type of exit are we going to have for this company? And maybe Rene from 500, he mentioned, $300 million companies, but what we've actually seen recently, it's, exits below 40 millions in Latin America and Spanish speaking LatAm. I was actually last week in Chile and I had this question in mind and I asked all of the VCs that I met, like, what are the exits that you're looking at in Chile? The Chilean startups. What is the valuation that they're exiting at? And a lot of them said the same thing, maybe 40 to 50 million and below. So in order to have, bring value to our investors, bring value to the fund, we need to be investing in these early stage companies at this, $1 to $5, $1 to $3 million valuation. Because of course, it's going to be an average. Some of these companies are not going to make it. Some of them are going to be, exiting and I don't know, maybe 10 million, especially for companies that don't scale as much. Everybody wants to, but most of the companies don't go international. So that's a reality.
So have you then seen a lot of companies coming out of Colombia and Peru? Have you seen a lot of those find a really niche market, build specifically a product that solves a problem in that niche market, grow within the country, and then get acquired by like a larger corporation? Is that kind of like the trend that you've been seeing instead of them expanding to other countries within Latin America?
That's the exits that I've seen in Peru. Yeah. They're mainly focused on Peruvian market, and they haven't been so many anyway. So we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. But the exit that we had from our fund, they're like companies from Brazil, from Fund 1. So all of them, they were M&As. And from that data set, for our own data set, we're learning that, these companies are exiting, even in Brazil, which is a bigger market. Also, valuations at exit are not, not as high as, well, maybe those are our investment cases, but that's our track record, actually. And so until we don't see any more volume of exits at this size, like maybe 100 or maybe 300, hopefully, I think we're going to stick to this strategy.
And since you guys are since you're very early stage, then how long do you typically like stick with the company? Like, if you take them to like a Series A, Series B round where maybe hopefully some like international investors are coming with deeper pockets, is that kind of the idea? Is like you help these companies through the early kind of growth stage and then kind of like facilitate conversations with other VCs and then kind of exit there, or what's the strategy?
Yes, similar to that. We kind of follow the life cycle of the fund. So the fund has 10 years of life. We don't want to extend it. We would like to, make it shorter because we want to bring liquidity to investors, because a lot of them, they're like doing follow-ons on our fund. So if we bring, some DPI for Fund 1, Fund 2, they're going to invest in Fund 3, Fund 4. So that's interesting for them. So we try to exit maybe Series B, Series C would be at most. One of our, maybe successful cases from Fund 1 is a fintech company in Brazil, and they just raised Series B this year. So for us, we're super happy with the results already, and they're planning to maybe raise a Series C next year. But if they don't, it's going to be, the last year of the fund, and we don't want to extend it. So we're going to look for maybe a secondary sale, or, I don't know, sell our company, or maybe repurchase of our shares to the entrepreneurs. So we don't want to go beyond that time. The other companies that we exited, this exit came from the entrepreneurs. They were looking for an exit. They were looking to being acquired by companies. So when you mentioned that before, what's the vision, or how are we working with corporates in the region to make these M&As or these exits to happen? So we're actually bringing startups to them, or also talking to them to understand what are their needs, so we can tailor or maybe, guide the entrepreneurs through this way. That's something that not only us, not only BVC is doing, but I know that other funds are trying to do, because everybody is looking for this, liquidity. Everybody's trying to get more CVCs or more corporations to invest in the VC market. Like, I was looking at some information last time that maybe in the US, 30 to 40% of the VC dollars come from corporates. I don't know, maybe it's a really high rate compared to like maybe 5% in Latin America. So there's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, that's big. So actually, on this note, what's been extremely helpful in terms of sourcing? I know that you guys also have an accelerator. Has that been kind of like the primary source of bringing in these really early stage startups?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. The program that we have in place, it's not exactly an acceleration program, because we only focus on the investment readiness part of an acceleration program. We started like an acceleration program, but focusing into sales, operations, and all of these other aspects that, a startup needs, we weren't able to, provide all this knowledge. So we decided, okay, let's focus on what we know, that it's funding, fundraising. And we have this as a source of like a deal source, but we have invested in more companies that come from references from other entrepreneurs. The ones that we first invested, they are always like making some intros, and these are the more, qualified leads to invest, actually. And then another source of deals is our own program. We have invested in a couple of companies from our program, but as you said, they're really early stage. There are some interesting startups that we met this year, but still we need to to monitor what they're doing, to wait for the right moment to invest. They're super early stage. So for this program, the companies that we select to invest in, we just do like a smaller check. Our usual check is 100K, but then for the companies from this program, we invest 30K. And then we monitor, how it's growing. We're super hands-on these companies because they're super early stage. And then we decide to make a follow-on investment. But actually, and also what you mentioned about the deal sourcing, if you don't find the entrepreneur or the startup at the right moment, then they go through an acceleration program like, I don't know, Rockstar or 500, and then evaluation, doubles or triples, and then, it doesn't make sense to invest. At least for us. So, and it doesn't fit our strategy. So yeah, it's a real challenge to be really well known in the ecosystem, so these entrepreneurs can look for us when they're looking for funding or mentorship, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Earlier today, a conversation with an acceleration program manager, and we're trying to find this like alliance with them, so we can both find these best entrepreneurs, the best stage, and we can both invest. They can invest as an acceleration program, and we can invest as a VC. So we might be able to find these partnerships with these programs.
That's incredible. So something that you mentioned, which is you guys do like invest like a small amount to companies that do go through the accelerator. Just want to confirm, is that like all companies that do go through kind of like your accelerator, do they all receive that amount, or is it just a select handful that do receive that small initial check?
Yeah,
That's
just select the ones that we like the most. And I mean, the program, it's like almost 4 months long. So we have the chance to really talk to the entrepreneur, understand, his vision, and to understand if they're aligned what we're looking for. So but, I mean, we only invest in a few. Right.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I'm starting to see, I feel like throughout LatAm, I think we've seen a lot more programs like that pop up because early stage investing, this, like it's fundamentally like a people thing. Like you're investing in the entrepreneurs themselves, maybe some ideas as well, but that really gives you a chance to like build trust in the entrepreneur, really vet them as a team, and then kind of, see if they're like really a team that you want to invest in. And then I love that you guys do like follow-ons of like larger checks into the startups that really stand out. So that's really cool.
I wanted to ask, obviously very excited about asking this question, but since you're seeing all of this sort of, like early stage deal flow and looking for all these startups, what are in Latin America, let's stick with like Spanish speaking Latin America, some like cool trends that you're seeing or like things that you're excited about, like specific sectors that are being represented for, founders that are popping up recently. We know traditionally like 40-50% of startups that are backed in LatAm are fintech, but I would love to hear, what are some exciting things going on in other sectors?
All right. So I don't know, maybe this is not like a surprising answer. Like I'm going to say AI, but it's, in Latin America, we're not developing like LLMs or like new AI technology. That's maybe more being developed in the US, of course, Europe. So what we're doing, or the entrepreneurs are using these available AI solutions and putting it into place, like, for HR solutions. I mean, I didn't mention that before, but we invest in B2B companies or B2B business models. So companies that are creating software for other companies in HR, retail tech, I don't know, maybe being more efficient with the use of resources like water, electricity. Also fintech solutions using AI, like for payments. Payments, it will be one of the biggest verticals within fintech.
Right.
But yeah, so like we're seeing a lot of this AI that's making these startups more efficient, and they're being faster into like maybe create an MVP, a pilot, and also scale faster. Those are the big trends that we're looking for. Of course, there's another side spectrum of startups that we don't invest in, but clean tech, biotech are also growing fast. They're not big. As you mentioned, fintech takes like maybe 40%. Then maybe e-commerce and retail, it will be the second with like 10, 15%. And then clean tech and biotech are really small, but they're growing fast. So personally, I would like to be more involved in this vertical. However, from our investment thesis, because of our investment thesis, we cannot do it. But there are some 2 or 3 VCs that I've met recently, though, that they're investing in these amazing companies, amazing entrepreneurs. They're maybe using like local talent, doing some local research, and creating amazing companies. Food tech is also interesting. It's growing fast. But there are even some unicorn companies like Notco from Chile. And also Notco is creating its own ecosystem of other like food tech and biotech companies that is growing, super fast. And I would say that would be a trend. I would actually invest more in these. Actually, I'm having a few meetings in a couple of weeks with some of these VC investors in biotech to really understand if we can be part of these, if we can invest in this type of companies, because they just explode. They create these, like, do research. Maybe they're super niche. They're like creating solutions for a really maybe not so broad problem, but it can be global and they can grow fast.
Yeah. I think biotech, that requires a whole nother kind of set of skills. I have a friend who's He's from Uruguay. He was a biotech engineer, and he's specifically looking to do biotech VC because there's a specific type of lens you have to look for to really understand kind of the scientific layer of what's going on there. Totally above my head, right? I think there's a little bit more of a line you can draw between like a fintech to a prop tech, e-commerce or something like that. But like, yeah, biotech's a whole other thing. I think clean tech, there's a lot of really interesting and, climate tech going on, interesting stuff going on in Latin America. It's definitely, I think it's like the 9th or 10th most popular sector for investments right now, but it's the fastest growing, I guess, as long as you don't like lump AI into like a single sector. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that'll be coming there. So good to hear you speak about it.
So something that also we want to touch on, you guys do have international investors, right?
Yep.
Okay. So that's something that we're curious to learn a little bit more about. So how has it been working with like international LPs, and like, have you had to do much? I know you're doing a lot of education, for example, in Peru. You said that you guys were trying to educate folks about like the startup sector and entrepreneurship, et cetera. But have you had to do much explaining or just education to your LPs on why LatAm and why to invest in Peru, Colombia, Brazil, et cetera? Or what's that look like working with like international LPs?
Sure. Well, our LP base, they're mostly, it started from Mitsuru's, my friend personal network at the beginning. And also he used to work in Bain and Company. So a lot of the investors are also some ex-colleagues from Bain. And some of the LPs that invested in our fund too, they're mainly entrepreneurs from Japan who had an IPO or, super big companies. So they were already familiar with the venture capital industry and the startup industry. So we didn't need to do so much explaining about what is a startup, really super basic, how does the VC industry works. But we did made a lot of explanation on what is the opportunity in Latin America. So the opportunity in Latin America is, I'm pretty sure you're aware, it's a young population, digitalized, it's growing fast, a lot of social gap, underbanked population, and it's growing. So these opportunities were really interesting, or these characteristics are really interesting for the Japanese investors, because the economy is super different over there. It's more stable, maybe I could say stagnated in some industries. So for them, they were looking maybe to have the opportunity to invest in a unicorn company or like a fund that has a lot of, multiples, because a VC fund that, could return maybe above average for them, it's a super return, compared to what they could find maybe in Japan in terms of, finance track record. But of course, for them, it's also interesting to access the innovation, new business models that could happen in different regions like Latin America, because some of these entrepreneurs that are our LPs, they have companies operating in Japan, but also in Southeast Asia, which is a similar region to Latin America. It's an emerging region and also fragmented maybe in different countries. So some of them, they're like learning what's going on in Latin America, comparing what's going on in Southeast Asia, and so doing some bridging between these two regions is interesting for them. So what we do is also we invite them every year. We do this like mission of LPs to Latin America. So we bring them to Peru. They were in Peru like 2 or 3 weeks ago. We took them, of course, to eat one of the best restaurants in the world in Lima. Last year,
which one was it?
It's called Central. Have you heard about it? Well, maybe if you're going to be in Lima, you should like book right now, because you need to book it like in 3 or 4 months ahead.
Yeah, we have Osaka booked.
Osaka is also
sushi. Bird Central. I don't know if my pockets are deep enough for that, at least being an MBA program right now, but maybe in a few years. Or maybe I'll become an LP in your fund and you can take me.
Well, I should say that actually one of our LPs paid the bill for the investment anyway. But if you were with us at the moment, of course, that'll work. So we brought them to Brazil last year, Rio. The idea is for them to understand, what's going on, how the region works, where are these opportunities, and they can meet the entrepreneurs that we're investing. They can talk to them, understand their vision. And I think for them it's a super enlightening to understand what's going on here. And from them, what we get is the experience that they have already as entrepreneurs. Not all of them are entrepreneurs, but the ones that are and are interested, when they come here, we do this like small event They talk about the experience. They talk about how they did an IPO, what did they focus on before growing their companies. And that's like this knowledge transfer from this super mature ecosystem like Japan's to Latin America.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's exactly kind of like the goal of this podcast is to kind of like, disseminate that knowledge, right, to international investors. But it's really, really kind of a pretty unique position you guys are in, I guess, compared to a lot of the funds in the region that fundraise typically like locally. The fact that you have like international LPs, and it's really cool how you do really share all that knowledge and educate them about how different the ecosystems really are in each country, because they're kind of unique hosts of opportunities and challenges within each one.
Yes, we're also working with the Japanese government, JICA, which is the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. So I think we have this focus on bridging these two ecosystems. So we're working with them to bring some entrepreneurs, not only investors from Japan to Latin America, and some Latin American entrepreneurs to Japan. So we're actually they have this program called BILA, which is Bilateral Acceleration Program. So we're trying to find these entrepreneurs that can go to Japan and then, they're going to help them to develop their businesses over there. So it's interesting to see how in time this is getting some more traction, some more momentum. And then the Japanese government and the ecosystem is really interesting to see what's going on in other regions.
What have you seen? So with BILA, for example, what types of startups have you seen the Japanese government be more interested in terms of like having over there?
So they're looking for companies that can solve some social issues in Japan. But of course, their social issues are different from the ones that we have in Latin America. So they are talking, for example, for companies that can work with the local governments to digitalize local governments documentation. Apparently, I didn't know that, but apparently in Japan, documentation for IDs is not digital, not yet, as in other countries in LatAm. So it seems that their social issues are not the ones that, for example, I don't know, climate or other maybe some water supply, like in Peru, for example, that would be a really important social issue to be solved. But over there, it's different. It's more take care of the elderly people or digitalizing some type of companies, the government, some bureaucratic systems that they have, some legacy systems that they didn't update it at some point. So there's actually a really good opportunity of companies that have already done that in Peru and other countries in that time.
That's really surprising. I would have thought that Japan, which is like a huge technology first economy, who would have never thought that their government paperwork is still on paper or not digitalized.
So the Peruvian Japanese sort of fusion it makes sense to me, at least from sort of a culinary experience, right? So I have a friend who's from Peru, from Lima. He claims that Peru, not Japan, has the best sushi in the world. Would you care to comment?
Well, yeah, I mean, the sushi that we have in Peru is combined with the Peruvian, of course, culinary and ingredients. So it's different. It's definitely tastier, I would say. I mean, if you had ceviche and sushi all together, so it's great. It's not, of course, not the original sushi from Japan, more the Peruvian version of it. And that's So that's why the JICA, this Japanese cooperation agency, they work closer with Peru and Brazil, because there's a Japanese community, a big Japanese community in Sao Paulo and also in Peru. So they're trying to, their philosophy is they're trying to give back something to these Japanese that had to leave Japan, to emigrate from Japan to other countries, because at some point Japan had a bad economy. So now that they can help them back, that's why they're bringing some investors. So they have this also other type of program. For example, in Brazil, we are helping JICA to do this program for women entrepreneurs in other type of areas, maybe not tech, more traditional entrepreneurship. So we do this 6-month program with, I think they're 60 women entrepreneurs in our program right now, but it's all financed by JICA and the Japanese government.
That's so cool. That's it's an interesting backstory. I'm glad we got off on that kind of tangent, because that's really interesting. Some insight that we never would have discovered.
Yeah, no, that's really cool how you guys are working with the Japanese government as well. I think that's something that a lot of funds, I feel like in LatAm, especially where they're struggling with funding, I hear a lot of them naturally they gravitate towards like the United States because it's just natural. Like it's a little bit farther north and there's a lot of capital there, but I think there's a lot to be explored from like other countries as well. A lot of like natural partnerships. So that's really cool.
Well, I've traveled to the US and Canada a couple of times to try to understand the vision that they have of a Latin American ecosystem and if they were like, interested in investing in our fund actually. But most of them, they would say always the same thing, that they don't know enough about Latin America. They don't have, maybe a local partner. How would they really understand who is the best manager? And of course, the US is big enough. There are many opportunities. So, why would they bother to, go abroad into like, riskier region, it's the currency risk, political risk. So, yeah. So I think it's complicated. Unless it's...
Well, next time, just send them our link.
Yeah.
Once it's launched.
No, that's what you said right there. That's exactly why we're doing this. It's that conversation has come up so many times from so many different folks, like whether we've talked to like founders of VCs throughout, Latin America or the United States. But we've heard from so many folks in the United States. It's just like, we don't know enough. This is what we know in the United States. We're kind of sticking to that. That's a little bit easier to do. And so traditionally the folks that we do see kind of venture into, investing in Latin America are those that either are Latinos, and so they do invest like back in their countries, or they are folks that have had some exposure to Latin America, whether they worked with like a Latin American company, for example, in the past, and then they decide to start a fund or something like that and start, investing in Latin America. So, but traditionally, like there's so many folks that were like, yeah, there's so much opportunity in the United States where we don't think it's like worth the time or effort to start investigating and like investing in Latin America. So that's kind of what we want to do. And there's a lot of angels that just don't have the resources, right, to do their own research and learn a little bit more about like a different economy or a different region, which is where we're kind of hoping to help out with kind of doing the legwork for them and showing them why.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Hopefully some of them, they really decide to invest in Latin America.
Yeah. I think timing is kind of right now too. I think it's people are kind of looking at it as like down years, but really it's just kind of back to an average, like back to a normal. Like you saw like so many international investors chasing, the IPOs of Nubank, VTEX, dLocal, and like 2021, and just pouring money in. And then a lot of them got burned because they weren't, as educated about the investment decisions they're making. So if we can kind of lay the groundwork again right now, I think we'll see a lot more like stable momentum and more educated kind of investors deciding to put money in. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
That's actually something you mentioned. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if my memory serves me correctly, I think you mentioned something around just being consistently, like just investing consistently throughout the years, both up and down cycles in Latin America versus just trying to time the market. I think you mentioned something like that when we first met, which I thought I feel like the right approach, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. My memory might be wrong.
No, yeah, we were talking about that, like that's part of what we're trying to do as a fund is like to be consistent. So during 2021, 2022, where valuations were like super high, we invested maybe less in less companies, but we were trying to really find these companies that, the valuation made sense. We didn't know it was a hype. We didn't know it was, it was going to go lower after that. But we really tried to don't go beyond our investment thesis.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's great. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. So we really appreciate your time. Yeah. Any last shout outs that you have for folks? Anything where folks can come find you?
Oh, sure. We're super active in social media, especially LinkedIn. So if you look for B Venture Capital or BVC, you're going to find all of our activities. Like if we're going to be in an event, like as speakers, or we're organizing something, or maybe our program with the Japanese government, or our our fundraising program for entrepreneurs, we're always posting. So, all of the entrepreneurs that want to have a talk with us, please, you can write me through LinkedIn. I do answer all of my LinkedIn messages, even though if it's a no-go, I say, it's out of my thesis. But, I think it's out of respect that we need to like just, throw a line there. So, yep, we're, really keen on talking to all entrepreneurs in that time.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you, Alejandro. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Thomas. Thanks, everyone, for this opportunity. It's been a really great conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll look you up in Lima. Nos vemos en la central.
Nos vemos en otras citas. Sounds good.
All right, ciao.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of La Frontera. We hope you enjoyed the show. You can listen to more great conversations on our Spotify, as well as on your other favorite streaming platforms. You can find us online at lafronterapodcast.com, and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for show notes and to stay in the loop for new content. Ciao for now.